Now, as we discussed earlier in the week, Liberal MP Jillian Segal called for mandatory sentences for vandalism and terrorism attacks on Australian synagogues. He also called for a national cabinet meeting to discuss anti-Semitism in this country. The Prime Minister initially gave this idea short shrift, but then his special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Jillian Segal, went into print this morning in The Australian saying that we needed a national cabinet meeting on anti-Semitism. Have a look at how the Prime Minister responded to questions about this today.
Well, I actually spoke with Jillian Segal yesterday a couple of times. We convened a meeting yesterday with myself, the Premier of Victoria, the Acting Premier of New South Wales and the AFP Commissioner to coordinate activity. We have Operation Avalite that is in place. What I want is to ensure that any act of anti-Semitism, that it stops. And I want people who are responsible for these acts to be prosecuted fully, because they are a crime and people should be held to account with the full force of the law.
Well, Australia's envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Jillian Segal, joins me now live in Sydney. Thanks for joining us, Jillian. You heard the Prime Minister there. It sounds like he thinks he's doing all he needs to do. Are you satisfied?
Well, Chris, I think we're talking about a big social issue here, a social problem, rather like the community has over the last few years dealt with, sexual harassment or gender-based violence. And I want to see a complete change in our community. And it has to start, obviously, with our political leaders, but it has to start with leadership everywhere, through the police, through community, through business, and through the judiciary. And my thought was that a national cabinet at least shows that we have the political leaders are focused very much on the issue. Certainly the Prime Minister responded very promptly and rang me immediately, and we had a couple of chats, as he said there. And I think having the Premiers of New South Wales and Victoria and the Federal Police Commissioner speak together urgently was a really good first step. But of course, these crimes are not just limited to New South Wales and Victoria. And I do hope down the track that we can treat this matter as urgently and as importantly as we have with gender-based violence. And they have been the subject of national cabinet meetings.
So it needs...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you finish.
I was only going to say that one of the important features of my role is that there are similar envoys, as you correctly note, elsewhere in the world. And we have all signed up, and Australia is a signatory, to global guidelines to fight anti-Semitism. And these global guidelines, which were originally signed by Australia and everyone else in Buenos Aires, which was that first meeting I went to shortly after my appointment, specify what governments need to do, or what generally the community needs to do. And one of the things we need to have, strong condemnation, we need to have strong appropriate laws, we need to have law enforcement, we need to have community attitudes informed by education. And we need to not politicise this issue of anti-Semitism. And I want to make sure that we have leaders on both sides of Parliament standing up and condemning anti-Semitism and working together to try and eradicate this scourge that is affecting us.
All right, I'll pick up those issues in just a moment. But first up, then, back onto this national cabinet. You were happy with the phone hookup yesterday as a first step, but you still believe this issue warrants a full national cabinet?
Well, I think when Parliament resumes and everyone is back from holidays, I think it would be good to, continue the discussion, and that I have certainly heard that the Prime Minister and the Premiers are keen to do. I think the Prime Minister put out a press release today.
But just quickly on that, it warrants a national cabinet. You're not backing down from that call?
No, I'm not backing down from that, but I do think timing is going to be important, and it's going to be important to have the Premiers all available, and particularly Premiers from Western Australia and Queensland, because we are seeing anti-Semitic incidents there as well. It's not just limited to New South Wales and Victoria.
Absolutely, and you're going to want laws matching in state jurisdictions across the country, state police forces involved, and all of that. Let me go back to what you said needs to be done to combat anti-Semitism: strong voices, good law enforcement, good laws. Because I want to go right back to October the 8th, 2023, when many people, including myself, were absolutely dismayed at public celebrations about the atrocities in Israel. And then just a day later, the chants threatening Jews on the Opera House steps. We had far too little condemnation from our political leaders then. We had next to no law enforcement response, and things have got out of hand ever since. What needs to change on that front? We can't allow this sort of hatred, surely, to be peddled on our streets.
I absolutely agree with you. And that incident on the forecourt of the Opera House was a shameful incident and sent shivers down, every right-thinking person's spine just to see that. And the Jewish community having been told to stay away. Yeah. Even further. But I think it's like a virus. Anti-Semitism spreads. It spreads on misinformation. It spreads on people blaming the Jewish community for other things. And we need to correct that through a whole host of actions. There's no magic bullet, unfortunately.
But strong leadership from the top is absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
And that's been missing. Would you agree that's been missing?
No, I think what we need to see is political leadership and other leadership. It's not just our politicians. We need people throughout the community to stand up. I've actually been the fortunate recipient of lots of community leaders who've contacted me and said, what can I do? And my answer to them is, you stand up in your own fora, whatever that is. If it's a business lunch, a community event, wherever it is that you are, a religious church event, wherever you are, stand up and you speak out against anti-Semitism, because that is the only thing that will really kill it. Of course, it has to come from the top. Of course, we have to have political leaders on both sides speaking out and condemning it. But we also need other leaders and even other faith leaders. And I've also been very touched by some of them making contact and sending out messages to their community saying this must be condemned. That's what we really need. Have you been contacted by any Muslim leaders? I have seen statements by some Muslim leaders. I haven't been personally contacted by them, but I've seen a number of statements which are quite positive in condemning what we are seeing on our streets. I think we saw quite a few at the time of the Adas synagogue burning. Yep. Thanks for joining us. Oh, sorry to cut you off. Jillian Segal, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Jillian Segal, they're live in Sydney, the special envoy in this country against anti-Semitism.